On a family trip, my parents asked me to give up my company shares so my sister's bakery wouldn't shut down. When I hesitated, my mom shouted, "She needs this more than you need profit." I said no. That night, my laptop was stolen, and my shares were transferred without my consent. I know people say things like that all the time, but I really mean it. I grew up believing that, no matter what, family was supposed to have your back. Through thick and thin. Rich or poor. Good times and bad. That's what I was raised to believe. But belief doesn't change reality. And the reality was this: my parents and my sister stole from me. And they didn't even feel bad about it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Trevor Langston, and I built my business from the ground up. No handouts. No trust funds. Just me grinding away, putting in sleepless nights and sacrificing things most people take for granted. Vacations. Dating. Even just having weekends off. For the first 6 years, I was broke as HLL, barely scraping by. But I pushed through. And eventually it paid off. By the time I hit 32, my software company was finally stable. More than stable, actually, it was successful. I had a comfortable income, a team I trusted, and shares in a company that was only going up in value. I wasn't a billionaire or anything, but I had earned every dollar I made. Which is why, when my parents invited me on a week-long family trip, I hesitated. I hadn't been on a vacation in years, but I wasn't sure I wanted to spend a whole week in a cabin with them. My relationship with my parents, Ronald and Beth, had always been complicated. They weren't bad people, necessarily, but they had a way of making me feel like I wasn't doing enough. Like no matter how hard I worked, I was still selfish for not doing more for the family. And my sister, Melanie? Well, we had never been close. She was 5 years younger than me and had spent most of her life feeling like she was in my shadow. Not that I had ever done anything to make her feel that way, she just always resented the fact that I was the successful one. She had struggled a lot more than I had. Failed college. Dropped out of a second one. Had a string of jobs she either got fired from or quit. Then, a few years ago, she opened a bakery. And, shockingly, it was actually doing okay at first. Until it wasn't. Anyway, after a lot of pressure, mostly from my mom, I agreed to go on the trip. I should have trusted my gut. The cabin was nice, but the moment I got there, something felt off. My parents were being extra nice. Too nice. Like they were warming me up for something. It wasn't until the third night that they finally came out with it. We were having dinner, barbecue ribs, my dad's specialty, when he cleared his throat and said, "So, Trevor, we wanted to talk to you about something important." I barely had time to respond before Mom jumped in. "It's about your sister. She's been struggling." I glanced at Melanie. She was staring down at her plate, picking at her food. "The bakery?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Dad nodded. "She's in a tough spot, son. Things aren't looking good. We were hoping you'd be willing to help out." I sighed, already feeling where this was going. I've already helped her, remember? I gave her money when she first opened, and I told her I'd help with marketing. She didn't want my help. Mom gave a strained smile. "This is different." I set down my fork. "How different?" Melanie finally spoke, her voice small. "I need more than just marketing." She looked up at me, and for a second, I almost felt bad for her. She had dark circles under her eyes, and I could tell she'd been crying. But then she said it. "I need you to give me your shares." I actually laughed. Not because I thought it was funny, but because I couldn't believe I had just heard those words come out of her mouth. "What?" Mom reached across the table, placing her hand on mine. "Sweetheart, listen. This bakery is her dream. It's everything to her. And you have more than enough. Just sign over your shares, and she'll be able to keep it running." I pulled my hand back. "You want me to just give her part of my company? Are you serious?" Melanie sat up straighter. "It wouldn't even hurt you, Trevor. You have plenty. You'd still have majority control." Dad cleared his throat. "We thought about it carefully, son. This is what's best for the family." I shook my head. "No, absolutely not." Mom's face twisted. "Trevor, she needs this more than you need profit." And there it was. The guilt trip. The "you have more than enough, why won't you share?" speech. I had heard it before growing up. Every time I wanted something they didn't think I needed. I pushed back my chair and stood. I said no. End of discussion. And I left the table. I should have left the cabin. That night, I went to bed still pissed off. But I wasn't worried. I had said no. That was it. Or so I thought. The next morning, my laptop was missing. At first, I thought maybe I had misplaced it. I searched the cabin, but it was nowhere. My gut told me something was wrong, so I grabbed my phone and checked my emails. And that's when I saw it. A confirmation email. An official notice stating that my company shares had been transferred. To Melanie. My stomach dropped. I scrambled to log into my account, but I was locked out. I checked my bank account. My personal savings were untouched, but my business account had a suspicious transaction, one I hadn't authorized. I felt like I was going to throw up. I stormed downstairs, phone in hand. My parents and Melanie were sitting in the living room, drinking coffee like nothing had happened. Where the FCK is my laptop? I demanded. Dad set down his mug. Trevor, calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. I yelled. Somebody hacked my account and stole my goddamn shares. Melanie flinched but said nothing. Mom sighed. Trevor, we didn't steal anything. We just moved things around. For the family. My hands were shaking. You used my laptop? Dad's expression was stone cold. You left it open. Are you kidding me? I ran a hand through my hair, trying to breathe. You hacked my goddamn account and stole my company. Do you have any idea what you've done? Melanie finally looked at me. It was for the best. Something inside me snapped. You think I'm just going to let this slide? I said, voice deadly quiet. Mom crossed her arms. You won't do anything. Because we're family. I smiled. A slow, cold smile. Watch me. I stood there, my entire body shaking with rage. They weren't even trying to deny it. They had stolen from me. My own parents. My own sister. And they didn't even have the decency to feel guilty about it. Dad leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees like he was about to explain some grand wisdom to me. Son, you have to understand, this was the only way. I laughed. A short, humorless sound. The only way? You think committing fraud and stealing from your own son was the only way? Melanie looked away, but Mom rolled her eyes. Trevor, don't be dramatic. You weren't even using that money the way you should have. You don't have kids. You don't have a family. All you do is work. My blood went ice cold. So that means I don't deserve what I built? Dad sighed. It's not about what you deserve. It's about what's fair. I stared at them, utterly speechless. Fair. They thought this was fair. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. You do realize this is illegal, right? Mom let out a sharp laugh, waving her hand. Oh, come on. You're not going to report your own family. We raised you, Trevor. You wouldn't have gotten anywhere without us. I clenched my fists. Are you serious right now? Melanie finally spoke, her voice hesitant. It's not like we drained your accounts. You're still rich, Trevor. You'll be fine. I turned to her, barely able to look at her without my vision going red. Do you have any effing clue what you've done? Do you even understand how business works? She flinched but stayed quiet. It's not just money, Melanie. It's control. It's power. Those shares gave me majority ownership. Now, I don't have that. I took a step closer, my voice dangerously calm. Do you know what happens when a company loses its majority owner? She swallowed. But I'm your sister. I'm not going to do anything bad. I let out a slow breath, pressing my fingers against my temples. It doesn't matter what you do, you holy. It matters what my investors think. My board. The people who trusted me. The moment they find out I lost control of my own company, they're going to panic. Stockholders hate instability. And when they panic, do you know what they do? Silence. I slammed my fist against the dining table. They pull their F-king money. Melanie jumped. Mom narrowed her eyes. Don't you raise your voice at your sister. I turned my glare on her. Are you serious? You think I'm the bad guy here? Dad rubbed his forehead. All right, enough. Let's all calm down. I turned on my heel. You know what? No. I'm done talking. Mom's eyes narrowed. And what's that supposed to mean? I grabbed my car keys and yanked my jacket off the back of the chair. It means I'm going to fix this. And when I do, none of you are ever going to see a dime from me again. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out the door, slamming it behind me. As I got into my car and sped off down the mountain road, my mind was already racing. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought I wouldn't go after them. They thought wrong. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. Every conversation, every warning sign I had ignored over the years was coming back to me all at once. This wasn't the first time my family had tried to take advantage of me. They had always found little ways to guilt me into paying for things, covering bills, helping out when they made bad financial decisions. But this was a whole different level. They had committed fraud. They had stolen my company. And they really thought I wouldn't fight back. I sped into town, barely stopping at red lights. My first call was to my lawyer, David Kessler, a no-nonsense, sharp-as-a-blade corporate attorney I had on retainer. The moment he picked up, I didn't even let him say hello. David, I need you to listen very carefully. My family stole my shares. I need to know exactly what legal action we can take. There was a long pause. Then a sigh. Jesus Christ, Trevor. Start from the beginning. I explained everything. How they had gotten into my laptop, transferred my shares, and essentially stolen control of my company. David was silent the entire time, listening carefully. When I finished, I could practically hear him rubbing his temples through the phone. This is bad. No crap. I mean really bad. If they transferred those shares and it's been finalized in the system, you don't just take them back. Legally, they own them now. My stomach twisted. You're telling me my company is gone? No. I'm telling you this isn't going to be a simple fix. I clenched my jaw. What do we do? David exhaled. First, we file for an emergency injunction. If we can prove that the transfer was unauthorized, meaning you didn't actually consent to it, we can freeze those shares before they can do anything with them. But we have to move fast. I was already pulling into the parking lot of his office. I'm here. Let's get started. We worked through the night. David pulled every legal trick he had. He drafted emergency filings, contacted the company's board members, and filed a fraud report with the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. Meanwhile, I called my bank, reported the unauthorized transactions, and started the process of locking down my remaining assets. By morning, the first domino had fallen. The shares were frozen. They were still technically in Melanie's name, but she couldn't sell them, move them, or use them to make decisions in the company. For now, the situation was contained. But this was far from over. Because now it was time for war. The first shot was fired 2 days later. I was sitting in a boardroom with David when my phone buzzed. We need to talk. I ignored it. Then another text. Dad, Trevor, you've taken this too far. Fix this before it gets worse. I almost laughed. Before it gets worse? Worse for who? Then Melanie called. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, David's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, raised an eyebrow, and answered. This is David Kessler. I watched as his face shifted from mild amusement to barely concealed disgust. He put the call on speaker. Mr. Kessler, this is Ronald Langston. My father's voice filled the room, tight with barely contained anger. We need to discuss the situation regarding my daughter's rightful ownership of the shares. David leaned back in his chair. You mean the shares that were obtained through fraudulent means? There was no fraud. Mr. Langston, I have a full case file that says otherwise. Unless you have something new to say, I suggest you and your daughter prepare for a very public, very expensive lawsuit. Silence. Then my mom's voice broke in. David, sweetheart, we're all family here. Let's be reasonable. I rolled my eyes. Of course she was trying the sweet old mom routine. David smirked. Beth, I'm not your sweetheart. And reasonable went out the window the moment you committed a felony. Mom sighed dramatically. Trevor doesn't need all that money. He has more than enough to live comfortably. I cut in. And that gives you the right to steal from me? We didn't steal. Mom snapped. You just what? I shot back. Redistributed wealth? You sound like a F-King scam artist. Dad finally spoke again. Listen, son, we can fix this. Just drop the legal action, and we'll work something out. I laughed. You don't get it, do you? I'm not working something out. I'm taking everything back. And when I do, I'll make sure you three never get another cent from me again. Silence. Then Dad scoffed. You think you're invincible just because you have money? David cut in smoothly. No, Mr. Langston. He's invincible because he has the law on his side. The line went dead. I sat back, exhaling slowly. David grinned. That was fun. I rubbed my temples. They're not going to back down. David nodded. No, they won't. But neither will we. For the next few days, I barely slept. Every moment was spent preparing. David and his team dug into every financial move my parents and Melanie had made in the last year. They checked emails, bank transactions, anything that could prove intent to commit fraud. And they found plenty. Turns out, my family had been planning this for a while. David uncovered emails between my mom and Melanie, discussing ways to convince me to hand over my shares. There were even messages about how they could access my accounts if I refused. The most damning part? A text from my dad to Melanie the night before my shares were stolen. If Trevor says no, we do this the hard way. Don't feel bad, he'll get over it. I stared at that message for a long time. I had already been furious before. But now it was personal. And then the real BMV dropped. Melanie wasn't just using my shares to save her bakery. She had already taken out a massive loan using my company's assets as leverage. And she was planning to use the money for herself. Not the bakery. Not to keep her business running. She had lied to everyone. And now I had proof. I stared at the document David had handed me, my pulse pounding in my ears. A $500,000 loan, taken out against my company's assets. And the worst part? Melanie had taken the loan before she even got control of my shares. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't a last-ditch effort to save her bakery. This was premeditated theft. I let out a slow breath. She was never going to use this for the bakery, was she? David shook his head. Nope. She had plans to use it as business expansion, but funneled most of it into a personal account. She was probably going to buy a house or fund some luxury lifestyle. I laughed. A bitter, humorless sound. She really thought she could pull this off. David smirked. Well, she almost did. But now she's completely F-ked. I leaned forward. Walk me through it. What happens next? David adjusted his tie. First, We make sure the bank knows the loan was taken under fraudulent circumstances. That means they'll demand immediate repayment. And since she doesn't actually have that money, they'll take legal action against her instead of your company. I nodded. Good. What else? David's eyes gleamed. We make this public. Your company needs to know that you were the victim here. The board needs to know. Your investors need to know. The moment they see that this was fraud committed against you, their trust in you remains intact, and their anger shifts toward Melanie. I exhaled. And my parents? David's grin widened. We have evidence that they conspired with Melanie. That's accessory to fraud. If we push this, we can go after them legally. I sat back, fingers tapping against the table. I had all the power now. My family had stabbed me in the back. Now, I was about to make them regret it. I started with the board meeting. I walked into the conference room, all eyes on me. Some of these people had been working with me for years. Some had probably doubted me the moment my shares got transferred. But now I had something they wanted, the truth. I took a deep breath. I won't waste your time. You all know about the sudden transfer of my shares. What you don't know is that it was done through fraud. Murmurs. A few gasps. I continued. My family stole access to my accounts and transferred my shares without my consent. And Melanie Langston. I let that name hang in the air for a moment, watching their expressions shift. Took out a $500,000 loan against this company, with no intention of using it for business purposes. Dead silence. Then, the CFO, Karen Patel, leaned forward. Do you have proof? I slid the documents across the table. See for yourself. One by one, they read the damning evidence. Their faces darkened. Unbelievable, one of them muttered. Karen let out a slow breath. Trevor, what do you need from us? I met her gaze. I need your support. I'm already working with legal to reverse this. But in the meantime, I want Melanie officially removed from any decision-making position. Karen nodded. I'll put it to a vote. But I doubt anyone here will say no. I leaned back. Checkmate, Melanie. David and I met with the loan officers, presenting irrefutable proof that Melanie had committed fraud. The moment they realized she had leveraged stolen assets, their tone shifted. We'll be pursuing immediate repayment, the loan officer said, his lips pressed into a thin line. And if she fails to comply, legal action will follow. I smirked. Good. Make sure she knows exactly who put her in this mess. Then the real fun began. My lawyer had sent official fraud notices to my parents and Melanie, informing them that legal action was coming. And that's when the frantic calls started. First, my mom. Trevor, we need to talk. Declined. Dad, son, this has gone too far. Call me. Ignored. Then Melanie tried. I let that one go to voicemail. A minute later, my phone buzzed again. A text. Melanie, Trevor, please. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Let's fix this. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Fix this? She wasn't sorry. She was scared. And she should be. Because I was just getting started. 3 days later, I got a call from David. You're going to love this. I raised an eyebrow. Oh. David chuckled. The bank officially filed a repayment demand against Melanie. Since she doesn't have the money, they're preparing to seize her bakery as collateral. I let out a low whistle. She's going to lose everything. Oh, it gets better. David's voice held an unmistakable note of satisfaction. Your parents, he continued. They were co-signers on the bakery loan. Which means when Melanie defaults, the bank is coming after them too. I froze. Then a slow smile spread across my face. They had tried to take everything from me. And now, they were about to lose everything. Melanie called again that night. This time I answered. Trevor, please. We need to fix this. The bank is taking everything. I leaned back in my chair, watching the city lights from my apartment window. Not my problem. It is your problem. We're family. I snorted. You stopped being my family the second you stole from me. Silence. Then her voice cracked. I didn't think it would end up like this. I sighed. You thought you could take what was mine and get away with it. You were wrong. Actions have consequences, Melanie. You should have thought about that before committing fraud. Trevor, I'll do anything. Just please help me fix this. That was it. The moment I had been waiting for. She was desperate. And I was about to make her pay. The next morning, I had David draft an agreement. It was simple. Melanie would sign over every last share she had stolen. She would also publicly admit to what she had done, a signed statement that I could present to the board and investors. In return, I would buy her bakery from the bank before they seized it. She wouldn't get a cent from the sale, but at least it wouldn't be taken from her and auctioned off to strangers. It was the only way she wouldn't be left completely destitute. I met her at a cafe to hand her the papers. She looked like ale, dark circles under her eyes, hair a mess, fingers twitching as she flipped through the documents. You're taking everything from me. I took a sip of my coffee. No, you took everything from me. I'm just taking it back. Her lip quivered. And what about mom and dad? I shrugged. They made their choice. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. She had betrayed me. She had stolen from me. She had used me. And now she was paying the price. She signed the papers with shaking hands. I grabbed them, stood up, and walked away. With those signed papers, I regained full control of my company. And I didn't stop there. I took Melanie's signed confession and sent copies to every major investor, every board member, every key player in my business. The response was immediate. Complete trust in me, complete disgust toward my family. And then came the bankruptcy notices. Melanie lost the bakery. She had nothing left except her personal debts. My parents, they owed the bank hundreds of thousands thanks to co-signing Melanie's loans. Their retirement savings? Gone. Their credit? Destroyed. They tried to call me. They tried to show up at my office. I ignored them. They had chosen their path. Now, they had to live with it. A month later, I finalized the purchase of Melanie's bakery, but I had zero interest in keeping it. So, I sold it to her biggest competitor. At a discount. The new owner fired Melanie on her first day. Poetic justice. My parents, they were forced to sell their house to cover debts. Last I heard, they moved into a small rental and were barely scraping by. Do I feel bad? No. Because they chose this. They thought I would be their cash cow forever. Now they know the truth. I owe them nothing. And I never will again. People like my family, they only love you when they can use you. The moment you take that power away, they crumble. And honestly, watching them fall apart was the sweetest revenge of all.